Hello and welcome to this session. My name is Carsten Bange. I'm the founder and CEO of Bark. Bark is a European analyst company focused on data and analytics, and we support our clients in making decisions around data and analytics strategy, architecture, or technology selections. But technology is only one thing to make data and analytics a success in your organization. What you also need is a data culture, and that's my topic of my presentation today. Let me start with this observation. This is a result from a recent survey of ours, where we asked more than 400 decision makers on their leveraging or how they leverage data. And a stunning amount of 87% agreed that they could significantly improve the business results if they would optimize their handling of data. So not only improving it a little bit, but significantly. And how can that be? How can companies quite openly see that they are not leveraging this asset enough, data, which is one of the most important assets of this century? And to start using data in a more strategic way, a lot of companies also started to design and implement a data and analytics strategy to guide them towards the data-driven enterprise, which is a goal for many, many enterprises. Our view on this topic is that a data and analytics strategy should be or has to be holistic. What does that mean? That means that there needs to be a look at technology, but also at the business aspects of data and analytics. And lastly, not to forget the organizational aspect. What we see is that too often data strategies are emphasizing technology much in a big way, which is then leading to a lot of problems because in the end, it's really more a technology strategy. It's something that does not relate to a lot of users and employees in the business departments, which then creates a lack of acceptance, a lack of implementation. And in the end, we do see some improvements on the technical side, but not a data strategy that really unfolds across the enterprise, that really brings a lot of benefit. So in the last 5 years, many companies now started to really emphasize the business aspect. So they looked very hard at use cases, business cases. They tried to understand better how data and analytics could improve their processes or their decision making. And that definitely increased the value of these data analytics strategies, but we can see it's still not enough. Firstly, what's really important is that a data strategy is really linked to a business strategy, so that it's very clear for every employee how any action they take around analyzing data, using data, making changes based on data, how this really pays into the business strategy. And vice versa, a business strategy should make quite clear why and how data and analytics is so important to achieve the business goals. Now, if we have this really holistic view on technology, on business aspects, maybe a link to the business strategy, and also taking a look at the organization aspects, we can ask this question here. What is the biggest threat that you have to your data strategy? What makes it fail? What can we see why things look good on paper, but are not really implemented? And the answer here is data culture. Data culture is part of the company's culture, and it really makes or breaks your data strategy. You could say it eats data strategy for breakfast. If you don't have a data culture that embraces data, that really helps the people in the organization to understand data, to understand the usage of data, and to embrace it in a way that they actually make it a day-to-day effort to take a look at data, to think about, okay, how could I improve what I want to do today using data or data analysis? If you have that, then you're on the road to a good data culture. But if you don't have that, then any data strategy will simply fail. It will be eaten for breakfast by the data culture, which maybe is not ready yet to really use data across the organization. So what we see is that playtime is over. We need to have this holistic data analytics strategy to ensure success. And holistic means that it really covers all three aspects: technology, business, and organization, and in a way really emphasizes the organization aspect, meaning how to make this strategy tangible for all the employees in the organization, how to bring it to life, how to create an environment, a data culture in the organization that a data strategy can really unfold its potential. By the way, holistic also means that it should be a data and analytics strategy. Why is this so important? Because we do see that many data strategies just focus on data and how it's being stored, how it's being made available. But that's not enough. A data strategy, at least 50% of a data strategy, should emphasize on the question, how is data actually being used? How can we bring it to life? Where does it create value? How can people understand what data is available? How can they be skilled, data literate, that they actually can use data? All these questions are equally important to the really data-related question in terms of how can I get to it? Do I need a data platform? How do I store it? And so on. So that's a holistic strategy. It's data and analytics, and it's technology, organization, and business-related aspects. Now, a frequently asked question here is, okay, understood, but how can we now positively influence a data culture in our organization? We do want that our data analytics strategy is a success, and we understood that we need to influence the data culture in the organization. And how can we do that? And this framework here can serve as a first answer to that. When we are working with our clients on designing data strategies, we always also think about the data culture. And to answer the question, so what can we do now? We understood that we cannot buy a data culture. We cannot also not order one, in terms of that we just give the order to all employees. We need a good data culture now. So this has to develop. So it can only be influenced in an indirect way. But there are 6 aspects that we can influence directly. And we think the 6 aspects written on that slide here are the most important ones. And for the sake of time, I cannot go into every detail here, but I would like to highlight a few of these 6 aspects and what important messages and what important aspects we see here. Let's start with data leadership. When you look at data culture, the leadership has a really big influence on how a data culture develops in an organization. We ran a survey on data culture last year, and we asked this question: so how can the company leadership actually influence data culture? And what came in number 1 in terms of number of answers was actually they could lead by example, meaning that if the management team of an organization, for example, is not using a lot of data to make decisions, or is not creating or doing changes in the organization, but doing that based on facts and based on data, then there is not a good chance for a data culture to develop in the organization, because anyone will see, okay, we have this data strategy, but our leadership obviously is not really embracing it, is not really following it in a way. So why should we? So leading by example is very important. And this quote here on the slide, in God we trust, all others must bring data, is quite telling in a way. Yeah? So if you go to your manager and the manager always demands data, whatever you want, you have to bring facts. Yeah? You have to make your point, but not by big arguments or anything, but really showing the facts and why should someone take a decision based on data and facts available. There are a few more aspects of data leadership I can highlight. It's also about explaining the strategy as part of the business strategy. So always making clear to make sure that there are challenges to the business, especially lately. We see so many changes and challenges to any business in the world due to the volatility and the dynamics of all the things that are developing, that it's making so clear that any organization can only be successful if they have the transparency of what's going on, if they have the data available to make informed decisions. And this is even more important now, but it should also be communicated. It should be made clear, okay, there's a lot of change, but we see very quickly in our data what's happening with our supply chain, with our customers, with our processes. And that's why we can act, we can react very quickly and at least adapt to the changing environment. Also, assigning responsibility for data analytics is important. It should be made clear, okay, who's responsible? And this is a leadership task. This could be added with goals, incentives, and sanctions. So make clear, okay, this is an important topic for a certain role, for a certain person. So it should also be part maybe of their compensation package even. Also, it's important, a leadership role, to see who's coming into the organization. And making data literacy, for example, part of any hiring process to understand, okay, do we bring in data talents into the organization, or at least people that are open-minded towards the topic and have the right mindset and spirit to drive the organization forward to become more data-driven. Also, quite interesting, this came also out of our survey here, enforcing a data-driven meeting culture. So people obviously see that there are too many meetings that are not really based on facts, where there's so many discussions, but maybe often in a way that they are not relating to data or facts. And obviously, it's something that people would like to see changing. Lastly, it's about experimenting. If we want to find new use cases, if we want to ask new questions and try to find a way to answer them with data, it really resembles an experimentation. Sometimes we fail. Actually, quite often we will fail. We will not find the data, the right data. Maybe our analysis is not really so insightful that we get something new out of it. But that's all part of this journey here. That's very normal, and we need to understand that. And we really have to inspire people to be open to it, to really try it, and also aware that this is a trial and error often. And before we find, let's say, the nugget in our data, we often need lots of approaches, lots of different ways to analyze it. And maybe sometimes we even don't find anything at all. But that shouldn't discourage us, but this is very normal. So experimentation should become part of our normal procedure in how to find new ways to answer questions, to improve the company. Coming back on the topic of the, let's say, assigning roles and responsibilities, we have quite an interesting result here in our data culture study. And what you can see on the chart here is we asked this question, okay, who's responsible? And you see the dark blue dots here. These are the best-in-class companies, the answers given by best-in-class companies, while the yellow dots are the answers from the laggards. And we rarely see such a spread in the answers in our surveys, but here it's very telling. You see that the best-in-class companies do have a dedicated person or team that is responsible for the company's data culture. It's often the CDO, the Chief Data Officer, but it can also be a different function. But what seems to be important here is that there is a dedicated person, or it's the management team, or maybe even the CEO. And we do see that, by the way, also quite often, that it's really made a top matter, and that the CEO has an important role on driving data and data culture forward in an organization. You see the opposite. What happens in laggard companies? They have no dedicated responsibility, 31%, or it's fragmented. And obviously, there is this strong correlation that the best-in-class companies actually have dedicated persons or teams. So they assign responsibility also for data culture. Let's take a look at a different aspect, that's data access. And coming back to the survey, we took this framework and asked the participants here, how relevant are actually these 6 aspects to you? And are you doing something? Are you implementing them or activities around them? Or is it planned to do something in this aspect? And you see the result here. So the most relevant and most important aspects is data access initiatives. That was quite interesting, a bit of a surprise, but when you think about it, it's really such a fundamental aspect that obviously companies understood that and said, well, this is the most important thing. We need to get right, maybe even get it right first. Overall, in the framework, there is no priority, actually. So you need all 6 aspects, or you can influence all 6 aspects, and there's no natural starting point. But taking the results here, it looks like companies think that data access should be of highest priority. And why could that be? Let's take a look what data access actually means, and maybe it's a bit more than you could think initially, because obviously it's about getting technical access to data. So it's about interfaces. But it's also about the question, okay, what am I allowed to actually access? And this is coming often with this topic of data democratization and the question of what is your policy? Is it need to know or is it right to know? And that's a very big difference. Need to know means I need to actually apply to get access to data. So I need to get someone to approve that I may access data. And the opposite is the right to know approach. So in companies that follow a right to know approach, all data is freely available to anyone in the organization, unless someone says, no, we need to protect this data. Not everyone can see this. It's maybe, it's personal information, maybe it's secret. Yeah? So we need to classify data, but we need to turn it around. It should be open to everyone. And then we actually start to limit the access. But this is the exception. This needs to be maybe applied for, or needs to be explained. Why do we actually lock this data up and do not make it freely available to anyone? And we do see that organizations that follow the right to know approach, or maybe changed their overall policies, they really unlock a lot of value in data, because suddenly, first of all, a lot of data sources get accessible. On the other hand, it's also about mindset. Yeah, it's really underlining this message that we want to become a data-driven company, and we make the data to do that actually available to anyone. But that's not all. It's also a question about data discovery, meaning that we have now technical access to data. We are allowed to access the data, but then we also need to be able to understand it. Yeah? So often it's quite cryptic. Yeah? Often we get tables of data and information, but we cannot understand. Yeah? We don't really understand the metadata, and that's what's all about here. And what we found quite useful for companies is to think about a new deal. And this new deal is between the data consumers and the data producers. Maybe let's think about how is it in many organizations. thing is, okay, you have maybe a data warehouse, or you have lots of data in operational processes and transactional systems. Maybe you have an SAP ERP system. And now you have an interesting question, yeah? Or maybe you want to run an analysis on a certain topic where you think, well, this could be really interesting. This could bring me forward. And then you need to get to the data. Yeah? And typically, what do you have to do? Yeah? You have to ask someone for it, the system owner. You get a data set, and then it's cryptic. You don't really understand what's in it. Yeah? How are the fields actually being used? So you need to actually find out. And how do you do that? Yeah? Maybe by trial and error, maybe by deduction. You look at it and say, this could be this. And or you need to ask someone, and you're basically at the mercy of some knowledgeable people, whether they tell you or not. And if we talk, for example, to data warehouse teams, they tell us this is often the most time-consuming task, yeah? Making sense of the data that comes from the source systems. But this is not the path to a data-driven enterprise, because much too time-consuming, and many people will give up. I would say, well, we cannot use that data. It's great that we have a data strategy. It's great that it's openly available, but I cannot understand it, so I cannot use it. So I think thinking about this new deal is quite interesting. What does that mean? It means that it's a new responsibility for any data producer to provide all data with an easy to understand description. So with metadata to anyone in the organization. So often this is done maybe using a data lake or a data repository in whatever way, technically. That's not so important, but the most important part is that it's the responsibility of these people to provide the data, but not only the data, but also the metadata. And there's also responsibility for the data consumers, because they are building the data products. They're doing something with the data. And this needs also to be made available across the organization. So they also need to explain what they did. So they need to make sure that anyone else in the organization can actually reuse what they did. And by the way, this is also part of the idea of a data mesh that's being hotly discussed right these days. But it's also about building data products, but also making them available across the organization. And this can only happen if you have a technical platform to do so, but if you also find a way to bring the metadata with the data product so other people can understand it. And that's still not all in terms of data access. We also need data literacy. So if someone gets to the data, is allowed to use it, and actually understands the data, still there need to be competency to do the right things with the data. And that's the data literacy, and that's why it's so important. And lastly, even if we know how to treat data, how to analyze data, for example, we still need to get a bit of a framework. What do we actually want to do with it? And what are we allowed to do with it? Yeah, we need to understand, okay, well, we have here personal data. Yeah? What can I do with it? What shouldn't I do with it? Data ethics. Yeah? Not everything I can do to analyze data is maybe something I want to do as an organization. Even if it's legal, there are often ethical boundaries where we say, well, no, this is something we as an organization do not want to do with that data. And so that also is part of data access. And I think now it's a bit clearer why I think it's such an important and such a fundamental aspect in terms of data culture, because there are so many things we need to get right to actually provide access to data, which is the foundation for anything. Yeah? Without data, we will never become a data-driven enterprise, obviously. So to sum it up, employees can access, may access, and understand the data, and they do that in a skillful and responsible way. So let's take a last look here at data governance. And just to highlight the importance here, the governance is something that obviously defines some rules. And with that, we do influence the data culture immensely. And we have these interesting discussions right now. Yeah, so companies need to find the right balance in their data governance, meaning they have to put up some rules, to define, okay, and I just had this example, how do we, for example, treat personal data? On the other hand, it shouldn't be too restrictive, because if the governance is too restrictive, we basically kill all the initiative. In the end, actually, we kill the data culture in the organization, because then, people are afraid. They are afraid to do the wrong things. They're afraid to do things that are forbidden, and probably it's safer for them to not do anything at all. And we do say this is a delicate balance actually to find, and we do have a lot of discussions right now where people responsible for data or for the data culture in our organizations tell us that sometimes the security requirements, for example, are getting too strict right now. That we are off balance and that we are really not supporting the case of becoming a data-driven enterprise by being too strict here. So governance has a lot of aspects, but finding this balance, I think, is the key aspect around data governance. So for the sake of time, I will end here. How I could give you a good overview on our thinking about data culture, but also a bit of some practical tips and ideas how you can influence the data culture in your organization. And we all, I think, agree that data culture eats data strategy for breakfast. And maybe looking at these 6 aspects, influencing them, you can prevent that from happening. And in effect, have a successful data and analytics strategy that really creates lots of value for organizations. I wish you good luck with that. If there's any question, please don't be shy to contact me. We are happy to help. And thank you.